Our first speaker today is Aida Bargues, and this is not a coincidence. Aida holds a Master of Science in Forestry and received her PhD in the field of soil science at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. During the past 2 years, Aida has been based at the World Agroforestry headquarters in Nairobi in Kenya, where she has been working on landscape level assessment of soil and land health across the global tropics. Many of you have heard about the Great Green Wall, the Bond Challenge, or Regreening Africa. The common factor in these initiatives is the use of trees to restore degraded lands, and this is precisely Aida's main field of research. She is particularly interested in how changes in tree cover and land use in drylands affect the water cycle and how trees can improve water security in such water-limited environments. Again, I remind you, during Dr. Bargues' presentation, you can ask your questions related to her presentation in the chat box of this YouTube channel. We will make a compilation of questions and offer them to Dr. Bargues at the end of her presentation. In the question and answer session, you will see these answers, but if questions remain unanswered, feel free to send us an email to info@desertleaves.org for continuing the discussion offline. Aida, we are eager for you to share some insights with us. The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wim, for inviting me to present in this symposium. I'm delighted. I will start by talking a little bit, giving an overview of the global restoration agenda, and then I will move into tree-based land restoration in Africa. So everyone has heard, there's a growing global restoration agenda right now. Starting next year, we have the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and which is a global effort aimed at preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. So this is restoration in the broad sense, combined with not just restoration, but conservation and sustainable land use. So we have now 10 years left to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and therefore the coming decade is going to be crucial, and ecosystem restoration is meant to play a fundamental role in achieving the SDGs. And as you can see here, this decade, it aligns with the decade of action as well. On the right, you can see an illustration which is called the SDGs Wedding Cake from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and it shows how the biosphere is the foundation of sustainable development. So protecting the biosphere and halting and reversing the degradation of ecosystems is the precondition for social justice and also for economic development. So if we do not achieve the goals related to clean water and sanitation, life on land and climate action, and life below water, we will fail to achieve the remaining SDGs, the remaining goals. And this infographic here on the left, you cannot see it very well, but you can download it. It shows like the road to this UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So what has been like what has brought us here? And this decade is the culmination of a growing global restoration movement, which involves several large-scale restoration initiatives, including, for example, the Bond Challenge and regional initiatives supporting this challenge, such as, for example, Initiative 2020 in Latin America or Initiative AFR 100 in Africa. And of course, ecosystem restoration is much broader than that and includes not only the restoration of land, but also the restoration of aquatic ecosystems. But since this webinar is mostly about reforestation and tree-based land restoration, I wanted to highlight these initiatives, which I think are highly relevant. And underlying the Bond Challenge and Africa 100 and Initiative 2020, underlying all these initiatives is the Forest and Landscape Restoration Approach, FLR, which has been defined as the process that aims to regain ecological functionality and enhance human well-being in deforested or degraded landscapes. So FLR is not an end in itself, but a process, a means of regaining, improving, and maintaining vital ecological and social functions. And the essence of FLR, of this concept, is formulated by 6 principles. The first, focus on landscapes. By adopting like a landscape approach, we learn how to look at landscapes from a multifunctional perspective, combining natural resource management with environmental and livelihood considerations. The second principle is engage stakeholders and support participatory governance. So actively engaging stakeholders at different scales in planning and decision-making regarding land use and restoration and monitoring, it's vital. Restore multiple functions for multiple benefits. So FLR interventions, they aim to restore multiple ecological, social, and economic functions across the landscape that benefit different stakeholder groups. The fourth is maintain and enhance natural ecosystems within landscapes. So it's not just about restoring, it's about conserving and sustainably managing ecosystems such as forests. The fifth is tailored to the local context using a variety of approaches. So FLR uses different approaches and it draws on science and best practice and also in traditional knowledge. And finally, manage adaptively for long-term resilience. So FLR seeks to enhance the resilience of the landscape over the medium and long term. So it's a long-term process. And as restoration progresses, information from monitoring, research, and stakeholder guidance should be integrated into management plans. So adaptive management emphasizes the need to adapt to changing environmental and social contexts and to learn from doing. It's basically learning from doing. So it is very important to invest in monitoring and evaluation and in knowledge management platforms to track and report progress and to capitalize on experience. So what has worked and what hasn't worked? This is fundamental. And here you can see now a picture that shows that forest and landscape restoration can provide a wide range of benefits that contribute to the SDGs. For example, the sustainable supply of forest-based products for energy consumption and production. It also improves food security and health. It also has health benefits, water security and healthy ecosystems, improved livelihoods, etc., etc. So back in 2011, the World Resource Institute did the first mapping of the global restoration opportunities. And this is not, I mean, it was not a very accurate map, but gives us a rough idea of the FLR opportunities worldwide. And even if it was not very accurate, one of the most important messages, in my opinion, was that mosaic restoration was the most widespread opportunity. So 74%, you can see here in this, 74% of the opportunities were in the form of mosaic restoration. So what is that? FLR, sometimes it involves the opportunity to restore large continuous tracts of degraded or fragmented forest. And this is what we call wide-scale restoration that you can see here. But in areas where there is agriculture, so the majority of restoration opportunities are then in the form of mosaic restoration. Restoration, when we have agricultural land, must complement and not displace the the existing land uses. So this results in a patchwork or mosaic of different land uses, including, for example, agriculture, agroforestry systems, ecological corridors, or discrete areas of woodlots here and there on the landscape, or protective forest along waterways. So this is what we call mosaic restoration then. And the Global Partnership for Forest and Landscape Restoration has produced a framework of 7 general categories of FLR interventions. And you can see them in the table, based on 3 land use situations. So forest land, agricultural land, and protective. And here we have the different FLR options: planted forest and woodlots, natural regeneration, and silviculture under forest land. Under agricultural land, we have agroforestry and improved fallows, which I think improved fallows is a part of agroforestry, so it's mainly agroforestry. And then under protective land and buffers, we have mangrove restoration and watershed protection. So the main idea of this, or the main message for this, is that there is a strong focus on tree-based restoration, but it also shows that FLR is more than tree planting, and it's more than forestation. Yes, increasing tree cover is at the core of FLR, but this tree cover does not need to come from planting. It can also come from natural regeneration, and it does not need to be a continuous tree cover, but instead we can have scattered trees or patches of woodlots or trees on the landscape. So I see many opportunities, in particular, to grow more trees on farms in different agroforestry settings. And now I'm going to show some pictures of how agroforestry can look like. And these pictures are mainly from Africa, where I've been working, both West and East Africa. So in agroforestry systems, farmers, they deliberately grow woody species on their farms. And agroforestry often leads to complex production systems that integrate trees, crops, and livestock. This picture here is what we call an agroforestry parkland. It's very common in West Africa. So crops are grown under and between the trees, and this tree is a shea tree, the karité, Vitellaria paradoxa, that you can use like the nuts to make butter that then you can use in cosmetics or for cooking and other products. Here we have, this is also from Burkina Faso, we have a nere tree, Parkia biglobosa, and you can see that under the tree the crops are growing much better than outside in the open area. So this is a very nice picture and very interesting. And different pictures. This is Kenya now, also Kenya, some baobab trees and crops under the trees. This is now Phyderbia albida. It's a tree which has a reverse phenology. So during the rainy season, when the crops are growing, the tree is leafless, and then it has leaves in the dry season. Some pictures of alley cropping. And here this is an improved fallow with Sesvania trees, which fix nitrogen. And this fallow, I think it was 2 years old when we visited here. Right, so this is how agroforestry can look like. Now I'm going back again to the global restoration movement. So there is a growing enthusiasm for forests and trees to tackle global challenges. We've all heard about how trees and forests absorb and store carbon dioxide, and the benefits and huge potential of increasing tree cover to tackle the climate crisis. But experts call to be mindful about pitfalls. So this enthusiasm is great, but we need to keep in mind some points, and we need to think about this. First of all, it's not about just increasing tree cover. It's not just about restoration, as I've said. We should also think about conservation and sustainable management of forest and other ecosystems. Again, it's not just about tree planting. Natural regeneration is a very cost-effective option, restoration option, that we should all keep in mind. The third point is that we should shift from tree planting to tree growing. We should start talking about tree growing instead of tree planting. Tree planting, it's an action that happens at a point in time. But projects should start thinking about growing trees and not just planting. Planting doesn't really mean anything from the point of view of long-term outcomes. The fourth point is that grasslands, peatlands, or wetlands are natural ecosystems that also need attention. And afforestation of these systems is a bad option. And there are many critics about this, and I think that they are very right, that we should not afforestate grasslands. We should also think about have an emphasis on the right trees for the right place and the right purposes. So having an options by context approach. Active stakeholder and community engagement is essential to ensure outcomes that are sustainable in the long term. We also need to think what to restore, what functions do we want to restore, how and for whom. And also considering community rights, for example, tenure governance and equity considerations when we are restoring. And finally, the last point is more funding for what? So there are large sums of money flowing into tree-based restoration initiatives, but how is this funding used? And many experts have highlighted that more attention could be given to stock taking, so to identifying successes and innovative, cost-effective approaches, to monitoring and evaluation, addressing the drivers of land degradation, and finally to improving the conditions to catalyze and empower bottom-up grassroots movements in support of restoration. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about tree-based land restoration in Africa. So Africa has been identified as the continent with the largest area of land with restoration opportunities, more than 700 hectares of degraded land. And most of the restoration opportunities, as you can see in this diagram, are in the form of mosaic type restoration, where agroforestry is key. And here we can see how degraded land can look like. So this degraded land can be restored to forest or mosaic landscapes, providing many benefits. For example, boost productivity, improved food and water security, protect biodiversity, increase climate change resilience, reduce disaster risk, and combat desertification. And there are several examples across Africa of regreening success where increased tree cover has brought wide benefits. Over the past 20 years, hundreds of thousands of farmers have invested in protecting natural regeneration to increase the number of trees on their farms. And they have decided to do this for economic reasons. For example, to improve soil fertility that then increases crop yields and household food security. And perhaps one of the most known examples is the case of southern Niger, where there has been a widespread adoption of agroforestry, and it is estimated that about 5 million hectares of degraded land have been restored. So these satellite images illustrate natural woody regeneration in a village in Niger. And you can see that between 1975, the picture on the left, and 2003, the picture on the right, there has been a great increase in tree cover. The black dots here are mature trees, and the random distribution of the trees indicate that they have regenerated naturally and not through tree planting. And contrary to what many people assume, this regreening that has occurred across parts of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in recent decades is not the result of massive tree planting campaigns led by government agencies and development assistance agencies, but rather this has largely occurred thanks to the actions of farmers who have protected and managed the natural regeneration of trees and bushes, primarily on cultivated land. And this process where farmers protect the natural regeneration of woody vegetation on their farms is known as Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, or FMNR. So it's a lot about protecting the regeneration from grazing, and you can protect like seedlings like this, or you can also have fences, fence like a larger area and exclude livestock from that area so that trees are protected. And these are live fences now. And it's also about pruning and taking care of the trees that are in your farm. And this regeneration can come either from seeds. Seeds can be already present in the soil. We have a seed stock, or they might have arrived from other locations. And this dispersion can happen in different ways. For example, by livestock. Or we can have regeneration through resprouting. So we have a rootstock and then it resprouts from there. This is also very common. And this farmer-managed natural regeneration is a promising solution to restoration. It is cheap, it has a low labor requirement, and it has a great potential to restore several ecosystem functions. So these different regreening successes that I've just shown are very important, I think, to guide the current or ongoing tree-based restoration efforts. So how do we scale regreening? And I really like this infographic from WRI, from the World Resource Institute, that shows that the 6 steps to success. So the first step is to identify and analyze existing regreening successes. So what has worked and why and so on. The second one is to build a grassroots movement for regreening, so that our projects that we have, that they kickstart a movement that continues beyond our project. Third, address policy and legal issues to enable conditions for regreening. For example, issues about tree tenure are very important. Fourth, develop and implement a communication strategy. Fifth, developed or strengthen agroforestry value chains, for example, in the case of shea nuts. This is very important, and many other agroforestry products, and expand research activities. And now I'm going to mention some of these ongoing initiatives. First, we have AFR 100, which is the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiatives. And this is a country-led effort to bring 100 million hectares of land in Africa into restoration by 2030. And you can see here that a large number of countries have already committed to voluntarily restore land. Then most of you will have heard about the Great Green Wall of the Sahara and the Sahel, which is also a tree-based restoration effort to halt land degradation across the African continent. So the Great Green Wall Initiative is a Pan-African program, and it started in 2007. And it involves a range of different stakeholders, including national governments, international organizations, the business sector, and civil society. In 2007, when it started, the Great Green Wall was envisaged as a wall of trees more than 7,000 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide across the African continent, from Senegal to Djibouti. But this conception evolved gradually over time, and instead of a wall of trees, it is now conceived as a mosaic of diverse landscape scale actions that are designed to improve environmental and socioeconomic conditions in the zone. And finally, I wanted to talk about the Regreening Africa project, which is led by colleagues at ICRAF. And this project, it has not such large targets as the ones I've just mentioned, but I think it is very relevant because it's very rooted in science and in regreening success stories. The project started in 2017, and it aims to improve livelihoods, food security, and climate change resilience by restoring ecosystem services in 8 target countries: Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Niger, Mali, Senegal, and Ghana. And in their webpage, you will find a lot of interesting resources that you can use. And one of the most interesting resources from this project is the Regreening Africa app, which is a mobile-based Android application that users can use to collect information on how farmers are managing and protecting trees on their farms. So it's mainly a monitoring and evaluation tool that allows us to track restoration interventions on the ground. And this application has been developed by some of my colleagues at the Geoscience Lab at ICRAF, at World Agroforestry, under the Regreening Africa project. And it has many features, but it basically allows us to have information on tree planting activities, FMNR, nursery activities, and even on trainings related to restoration projects. And it's open for everyone to use. Users can collect the data offline, and then they can upload it to the server once their device is connected to the mobile network or to Wi-Fi. And this is an example of some of the data you can get from this. This is now for a Greening Africa project in Senegal, and these are the species under FMNR plots, like the tree species, the scientific name, and their occurrence in these plots across Senegal. So it's very interesting, for example, to evaluate and to monitor tree diversity on farms and many other aspects. And we also have polygons here. So users, they walk the boundary of the fields with tree planting or with FMNR interventions, and they submit these geotagged field polygons. So then we also have not just information on the tree size and tree species, but also on their location, which is excellent for tracking restoration. Thank you very much. I hope you liked it, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Aida, for this fantastic presentation. It was absolutely very compact, of course. 30 minutes are far too little to talk about this in depth, but I think it was a great overview that you have given us. And indeed, the questions are coming in. First question that we received was from Karim Mapti. I wonder why North Africa is not included in a lot of these projects. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I think it is included, for example, in regreening, in the Great Green Wall Initiative. North Africa is now included into the extended countries. And many of the projects, I don't remember the names now, which are from that region, are now part of the Great Green Wall Initiative. But yeah, I really don't know why it is like that in other cases. I'm not sure about Africa 100, for example. We can look maybe at the map again. Let me see. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, the Great Green Wall Initiative, it started as a Pan-African project. So the countries that wanted to be part of it, they joined. And it's the same with AFR 100. It's open to any country to join.
Okay, I know that we have several people that have that are participating today in this symposium. Also, several of them from the North African region. So, any of you who are experts in the reforestation in drylands in Northern Africa, you're welcome to write in the chat box or send us emails and give us feedback. So that in future occasions also we have the opportunity to put to shine some more light on these initiatives in your region. Second question for today was, many are concerned that increasing tree cover in drylands might put into risk already scarce water resources. Do more trees always lead to less water availability?
Yeah, so this, yeah, as you said, I could not talk about this, but this is exactly what my research is about. I'm looking at how changes in tree cover affect water availability. And it's something, it's a very interesting topic, because some years ago, everyone thought in the field of forest hydrology that increasing tree cover would always lead to decreased water resources. So they like advised against afforestation or reforestation projects in drylands. But the problem with this scientific evidence for this view was that it was coming mainly from temperate areas. So there were some studies for drylands, but they were not, like, most of them were not in the tropics, which makes it like very difficult. And also, like, they always compared like open like land with closed canopy forest. And as I've said today, most of the restoration opportunities are not in the form of closed forest, but like a mosaic restoration. So all this evidence is useless to address like the impacts of mosaic restoration or of agroforestry. And in these projects and these success stories that I've mentioned from the Sahel, like, people have observed that water in the wells, the water level is rising after this increase in tree cover. Like, it's not a lot of trees, it's not a forest, but having more trees has improved. And this is also like what my research has been showing. We have increased groundwater recharge when we have a moderate tree cover. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Kiran Dominic has asked us a question. It's good for the world in general, climate change, etc. But how is planting trees going to help a small farmer? It is an extra expenditure for them, Kiran supposes. What is your vision on that?
Yeah. Again, drawing from the case in Niger that I've shown, I mean, the case in Niger was not, like, the farmers did not think about like helping combat climate change when they decided to increase trees on the farms, the tree cover on the farms. They were thinking about themselves and the benefits that they would obtain. And they saw that I mean, before in Niger in the 70s, like, farmers used to think that having like a clean agricultural field was like how you were supposed to do things. They didn't let any regrowth. They didn't want to have any trees because they wanted to have a clean field. But then some projects started here and there, and then they observed that, wow, like, my neighbor who has trees suddenly has increased yields. Like, they could see like the direct benefits for food security and for water availability. And then they started like adopting this agroforestry because they could see the benefits that they had themselves. They were not thinking about the environment or
So the
climate.
example was important for others to go the same way.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I think many projects should start thinking, that I mean, it should not be something that comes top down, but it should be like they need to show like the benefits, direct benefits for farmers, for this to like be a long-term process that is sustainable.
Yeah, and these direct benefits being the fact that the vegetation works as a fence, or that it gives fodder to the animals, and even food for people. So actually, rather than a cost, an expenditure, it can be some extra income, or at least make their life easier.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Okay, I think that answered the question quite well. Robert Winterbottom from South Africa. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Same opinion as I have. Can other partners engaged in restoration have access to and make use of the Regreening Africa app? Are training modules available for the app?
Thank you to Robert. I want to acknowledge that he has been an important part. Like, we have been discussing a lot during the last days about FMNR and other things for this presentation, and he has wonderful insights. So the Regreening Africa app, there are some tutorials on YouTube that you can watch, and you can download the app, and it's free. And now version 2 is coming soon, and it has some new how do you say it? Like, yeah, there you can do more things with the second version of the app. And yes, there are tutorials, and I can also, if someone wants to know more about it, and I can give you some context to get in touch with the developers and to know more about it.
Okay, thank you. Consuelo Hurtado has a question from Murcia here in Spain. Are there any initiatives oriented at the same time to repair hydrological damages? It's really important to have this in mind.
I'm not sure, like, hydrological damages, what does it mean here? Is it like damages from flooding, or I mean, yeah, I don't really understand the question about hydrological damages. Of course, restoring hydrological functions is very important, but hydrological damages, yeah, it would be great if she could write, like if Consuelo could write like more detailed, like what does she mean by hydrological damage.
Consuelo, please send us an email to info@desertleaves.org, and we will make sure that Aida gets this email and can answer you more in detail to this question. Okay, the next is popping up. There it goes. How can you combine both socio-economic and environmental needs in a practical way at landscape scale?
So I think that using a landscape approach, but of course, like, this is very difficult in practice. Like, we have all these principles about how FLR should look like, but how do practitioners do this? Like, how do we, like, yeah, and it's very difficult. And I think there are some cases, case studies that you can see on the GPFLR webpage on how you can do this. But of course, I think what I think is that we have often thought about this as exclusive, like either socioeconomic or either environmental. But I would like, in my mind, this is integrated. Like, we should think about social ecological systems where humans are part of the ecosystem, and we have this environmental ceiling that constrains how much we can develop. So that's my approach. But of course, in practice, like doing this, it's much more complicated.
Are there any studies that are ongoing that have been done on forest landscape restoration and their effect on, let's say, biodiversity and other specific environmental or nature-focused functions of the landscape?
Yeah,
for example, bird species that are favored by these restoration initiatives.
Yeah, they are coming. There are studies, and they are coming more and more. And you will see there's a lot of studies now coming in Nature and Science, like top journals on restoration. So it's very exciting to see all this science now coming, and I hope that all these initiatives will draw from this science and learn from this and apply it really.
Okay. Look, Consuela Hurtado is already back. She specified that her previous question was related to erosion and damages from water erosion. So
Yes.
how is the landscape restoration affecting this in a positive way or negative way?
Yes, so this is fundamental, of course, and it's very related to what I was saying about restoring hydrological functioning of soils. So if soils, for example, have a low infiltration capacity, then we have a lot of erosion. And a lot of my research has been on looking at the impacts and the benefits of trees on improving this soil hydrological functioning. So doing like how trees with their roots and the associated soil fauna, they improve like the infiltration of water into the soil. So if there is more infiltration, then we have less runoff. And so, yes, it's a lot of research about this, and it definitely improves and it reduces erosion risk, yes.
Thank you. Kiran is back with a second question, a bit more technical. In the Niger example with the mosaic method, what is the spacing between trees, or how many trees per hectare?
So in the case of Niger, and I think also in the case of, for example, agroforestry parklands that I was showing before, there are, I mean, it changes a lot, like the tree density, but we are usually talking about between 10 trees and 100 trees per hectare, something like that. It's common, I would say. Okay.
Good. I think we have come at the end of the first round of questions. So we're going to go to our second presentation. Thank you very much, Aida, for all these insights and answering these questions. It was extremely interesting. I hope you continue to watch the other participants and presenters for today. Our second speaker today is Professor JiaoJun Zhu. There we go. I'm sorry, the teleprompter is giving me some hard time, as you saw in the first, in my first intervention. Professor Zhu's field of expertise are silviculture and forest ecology, particularly for secondary forests, plantations, and protective forests. I'm particularly pleased that we have been able to engage a Chinese expert in forestation in today's symposium. Personally, I believe that the Western world tends to have a blind spot for what is going on in the Far East, even if the events occurring there are extremely important for their sheer size. And the same goes for forestation. Today, Professor Zhu will offer us insights in the world's most ambitious afforestation project, China's Tree North Afforestation Program, which started in 1978 and is scheduled to continue until 2050. The Tree North Afforestation Program affects a surface of no less than 4 million square kilometers over northeast, northwest, and north central areas of China. In total, 42% of the country's territory, characterized by arid and semi-arid climate conditions. 4 million square kilometers. That is about the size of the entire European Union. Remember that you have the occasion to launch your questions to Professor Zhu in the chat box of this YouTube channel for the discussion in the question and answer session afterwards. Professor Zhu, thank you so much for offering your collaboration to our symposium today. I'm thrilled to learn about the TNAP. The floor is yours.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, William. Thank you for your introduction. And thanks to the Symposium Committee for inviting me to share the case story of dryland forestation in China. Thanks to JiaoJun for his effects on testing meeting system. I'm JiaoJun from the Institute Applied Ecology, the Chinese Academy of Science. I would like to talk about the afforestation status in 3 north regions of China, where covers more than 95% of China's arid and semi-arid areas. And here is the outline of my presentation, including the background, Merced afforestation impact, problem, future, and acknowledgement. First is the background. Before this presentation, I'm going to show you some pictures about the forestation in 3 north regions of China. And this is the shelter built in arid and semi-arid farmland in northwest China. The agriculture would not be conducted without the shelter built. The water resource here it comes from the Yellow River. And this is the shelter built in southeast of Qinyuang, the northwest China. And this is the first step for sandland afforestation in northeast China. First, we set up the grass grid to fix the movable deals and prepared for afforestation. And here is the formation of the sandland afforestation in northeast China. And this is the preparation for afforestation of soil and water conservation forest in same area of Shanxi province. And here is the afforestation for soil and water conservation. And those are the soil and water conservation forest in North Plateau. And this is an example of water conservation forest in northwest of China. Okay, all about the forest shows afforestation all belong to the protective forest, which is defined as the specific forest type for improving environment conditions and protecting the ecological friendly areas, for example, the dryland. And those protective forests could be divided into the shelter belt or the windbreak and the sand fixation forest, soil and water conservation forest, and so on. And some large scale protective forest or afforestation programs have been attempted worldwide. For example, the Great Plains Salt Belt in USA, the Great Plains for the Transformation of Nature in former Soviet Union. The 3 North Afforestation Program in China, we call the TNAP, is the world's largest afforestation project, which started in 1978 and will last till 2050 in China's northeast, northwest, and north central of China. It including 95% of China's arid and semi-arid areas and 40% of soil erosion areas. According to the overall planning of the TNAP, It covers 551 counties in 30 provinces, with a total area of more than 4 million square kilometers. It's scheduled a period of 33 years from 1978 to 2050. The objective of the TNAP was to increase the forest cover, protect agriculture, reduce the soil erosion, control the desertification, and enhance the carbon sink. Of course, the regional ecological effects and social effects are also expected. Through the 40 years construction of the TNAP, we would like to know the general afforestation status of TNAP in order to better develop the TNAP in the next 32 years. So we made a systemical assessment of TNAP with the following central goals. First, how much does the TNAP increase the forest coverage? And second, how the water and soil conservation first control the soil erosion by water. The third is the desertification reduced efficiently by planting sand fixation first. And the final is how much does the TNAP sink the carbon. The second is the MERSIT. For accurately evaluating, we divided the study area into 4 zones according to the landform, climate, and administrative divisions, including the Northwest China, North Plateau, North China, and Northeast China. In those zones, we used remote sensing and field investigation methods to monitor the protected forest and affected from the station level to the 3 north levels. We collected about 2,000 scenes, remote sensing images of the TNAP during the fair period from including 1978, 1990, 2000, 2010, and 2007. The remote sensing images, including the landside, supposed file, models, and NOVA, and those images were used to monitor the dynamics of forests, desertification, soil erosion, and so on. Meanwhile, our assessment also relies on the Chinese Ecosystem Research Network in 3 North regions. To verify the remote sensing result, we have carried out the field survey. Till 2017, about 70,000 kilometer field survey were conducted. And at the same time, the National Forest Resource Inventory was used to calibrate the quantity and quality of the TNAP. 44,000 permitted sample plots of the forests were used in this assessment. The third part is the forestation result. And this is the method for monitoring the quantity of afforestation in TNAP. And this is the method for monitoring the quality of the forest in this area. And here is the afforestation forest area. We defined the forest area with the canopy cover of more than 30% and more than 40% for the shrubland. The forest area in 3 North region was 22.1 million hectares in 1978 and 33.9 million hectares in 2017. That means 50.8 million hectares increased in the past 40 years. The forest coverage increased by 3.96. And we also compared the afforestation result with the statistical data from the forestry administration agencies. The forestation perceived area is 30.1 million hectares. So the forest surveyor route is about 52%. And here is the quality of the forest in TNAP. The proportion of high quality forest decreased from 42% in 1978 to 30% in 2017. And here is the impact of the TNAP. First is the impact on the soil erosion. And this is the result at the method for evaluating the soil erosion using the Russell model. The soil erosion was classified into the 5 levels. The area of soil erosion, regardless of the erosion level, decreased by 70% in the past 40 years. Particularly, the severe and extremely severe decreased more than 90%. And we also used path analysis method to identify what roles of the water and soil conservation forest to the soil erosion reduction. And we found the soil erosion could be controlled efficiently by TNAP with a contributed rate of 61% during the past 40 years. And here is the impact of the TNAP on desertification. The desertification was classified into the 4 levels. The area of desertification increased from 1978 to 2000, but decreased from 2000 to 2017. The contribution of the sand fixation forest to the reduction of desertification was only about 50%, of which slight level count for 40%. The other level only take less than 1%. The relative contribution rate of shrubland is more than that of forest because of the serious decline of the arbor forest. The third is the impact of the TNAP on carbon sink. And here is the method. We estimated for the TNAP carbon sink with the forest biomass, soil carbon, and the effect. Here is the result. In the past 40 years, and a total of 2.15 pg carbon was increased, which is about 6% of the industrial CO2 emission in China from 1980 to 2017. The third part is the problem exactly in the TNAP. The first problem is the low survival rate of forestation over the past 40 years. The major reason is that some trees didn't survive after 5 years since planting due to no matching tree species with the set conditions. Particularly in the arid and semi-arid areas, the water doesn't meet the need of forest growth. The second problem is the low quality forest increased, but high quality forest decreased over the past 40 years. This is because at the starting of the TNAP in 1978, most of the forest in Sylvinos regions was natural forest. But in 2017, planted forest dominated the area. So some planted forest may decline because there is no management The third problem is the controlled desertification by afforestation was effective only in the area with low risk of desertification. This is because, first, the decline occurred in the sandfication forest due to most of the located in arid and semi-arid regions. And second, the tree species selection for afforestation in sandland didn't factor the water ability. The third is the proportion of the land scrubland was low than they should be. The final part is the future of the TNAP. According to the problem exists in the TNAP, the first suggestion is the replanning the TNAP based on the water capacity. Because the water source is the key issue for afforestation in arid and semi-arid areas. So we replanted the TNAP according to the water resource, and we developed new methods to obtain the aridity index, and then we divided the 3 north regions into the 4 catalogs, including the extreme drought, no vegetation zones, and the drought rubber savanna zones, and the semi-arid rubber zones, and semi-arid and semi-humid arbor zones. And second, enforce the scheme of the measurement based on the theories and technology for measurement of the protected forest. And we divided the 3 north regions into the 4 catalogs. And we give the measurement measures in the 4 zones respectively. And final, we suggest to constructing the ecological 3 nodes. That means we should construct the 3 nodes, the TNAP, in the next 30 years by integrate different ecological projects in the 3 north regions, because we didn't designate the effect of other ecological projects in the 3 north regions on the ecological environment in our assessment. So we suggest to integrate the different ecological projects in the 3 north region and to make the whole consideration for the ecological civilization construction. This research has been supported by Chinese Academy of Science and the National Science, Natural Science Foundation of China, and the people in research group of forest ecology and management give help in field observation and valuable discussion during the seminars. Thank you for your attention. Any questions, please?
Thank you very much, Professor Zhu. This was extremely interesting. Of course, 20 minutes are, again, far too little to explain in depth the TNAP to the public of today. But I think you have managed well to give us some insights in the size of this project, in the effects, in the struggles that China has had with this project, and fair enough, also the fields where the project was not completely successful, and how you will tackle these problems in the further future to make the 3 North afforestation project more successful here until 2050. Because of the large temporal can you put this on screen, please? Because of the large temporal scale being considered in the TNAP, are there any considerations about climate change impacts on the afforested land? So we know that climate is changing, and in the past, you were certainly considering, or China was certainly considering a specific set of climatic conditions for this region, but climate change may change these conditions. How is this climate change going to affect the efforts that were carried out so far?
Okay, and the climate change is very important for the afforestation in the arid and semi-arid areas. In this assessment, and we didn't consider the effect of climate change, but the new research product of the effect of climate change on the TNAP has been launched by the National Science Foundation last year. Maybe the effect of climate change on the afforestation in the TNAP, and the result maybe get the result in the future 3 or 5 years. Okay.
Okay, thank you. How do you, the question is maybe repetitive, but how do you ascertain about the climate resilience of the created forests? Very related to the previous question, of course.
Yes, the planted, as the assessment in our result, in 2017, the forest quality, the high quality of forest decreased compared with the 1978. This is because the planted forest had been influenced by the climate change. For example, because the increase of temperature and the rainfall flooded greatly. So the planted forest may be declined because of the water limited. So the created forest, the climate resilience of the planted forest is low compared with natural forest in 3 north regions. Yes.
And do you tackle that by changing the species that you plant, or other management techniques? What is the response of the technicians on these changing conditions?
Yes. For example, the mixed forest was suggested, but it's very difficult to afforest the mixed forest. So in the management practice, the steam density was controlled. So, for example, in the arid sandland, the savanna forest or the grass and with the sparse forest was suggested to reduce the effect of the climate change, to improve the climate resilience of the planted forest.
I see. Thank you very much for clearing that. You've talked about soil carbon sequestration. How reliable are the estimations of this carbon stock as compared to those of the aerial part of the plant?
Yes, because this is a very large scale areas, so it's very difficult to estimate the carbon sink. And in fact, in the 3 North region, only about 40 million hectares of forest. So we used the National Forestry Survival Inventory data those data, we use the 44,000 sample plots to verify.
44,000 sample plots. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. A question of Robert Winterbottom. What were the main methods used to assess carbon sequestration? Have any new low-cost methods been developed to make it easier to assess changes in carbon stocks?
Yes, and in fact, the method for estimating the carbon sink is not new, not novel. First estimate the biomass of above ground, and then we estimate the carbon of the below ground. That means the roots. The root biomass. And the second part is to estimate the soil carbon increase due to the afforestation. According to our observation, before the first 10 years, the carbon sink is minus. The carbon sink is decreased. After 10 years, the carbon increased with the forest aging. So we estimate the afforested soil carbon by the meta-analysis and the field sample plots. The third part is the effect of the forest on controlled erosion, because the soil was conserved. So, and the carbon in this soil was also contributed to the TNAP. So the carbon sink totally included in the three parts. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Aida Bargues, our previous speaker, has a question for you. What species are being planted, and is tree genetic and species diversity taken into account?
Yes, the most popular broad-leaved tree species is populus, and the conifers is the Mongolia pine, the Pinus cerevisilis malati mongolica. This is the two major arbor tree species. And
okay, maybe Aida, you can send the question, and we will make sure that Professor Zhu send you a list of the main species that are used in the TNAP. I think that will be interesting for you. Next question. Do you think that additional treatments for improving early growth performance, such as tree shelters, soil amendments, hydrogels, etc., can have a chance in the third phase of the project?
I think the third phase of the project maybe put the emphasis on the management, because because the afforestation site is very difficult to plant the new trees. So the third phase of the project is to take the action on the management, use the new technology for the protective forest, because the forest in the North region, the purpose of the TNAP is not to produce the timber, it's to provide the protective function. So the theory and the technology for management of the TNAP is very different from the management for the timber forest. So I think in the third phase of the project, maybe we concentrate the research on how to manage the TNAP forest. Okay.
Okay. Any participants who have ideas, suggestions, or products that, in their opinion, can be useful in these kind of initiatives are, of course, welcome to share this with us, and we will make sure that Professor Zhu receives these suggestions as well. Another question from the public. That would mean an increase in the unit cost of planted land. Would it be feasible? That is, of course, when we connected to the previous question with using enhanced methods like the hydrogels, etc. It's an interesting question. In such an enormous surface that is affected by the TNAP, cost considerations must be very important. Is this a restriction that is really sensible and that is affecting the project as a whole, the cost of per hectare of the planted land?
Yes. Maybe as you know, in the past 40 years, the economic of Chinese increased greatly. But before 40 years, for example, in 1978, the economic of China is was very low. So in the next stage of the TNAP, the state will increase greatly in the investment to the TNAP. Maybe 3 times the cost of planted forest, maybe increase 3 to 5 times compared to the past 40 years.
Okay,
so,
many thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. One last question. Thanks for the presentation. Aridity index doesn't have into account soil storage. Is it considered in some way when planning the different aptitudes of zones like shrubs, grasslands, arbor?
It's a very good question, and in fact, the soil types is to divide the soil classes, the soil types is very difficult for the large areas. So we have another research specifically on the soil types and the soil and the set condition for the TNAP. And in this assessment, in my presentation, I didn't include this part of the soil storage.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks again, Professor Zhu. That was very interesting. Also, thank you for answering these questions from the public. I think now it's time we go to our third speaker, Antonio del Campo. Buenos días. Antonio is a professor at the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia and also founding board member of Desert Leaves Foundation. Antonio is originally from the south of Spain, but lives here in the Valencia region for quite some time now. He has worked on forestation, study of forestation in Spain for many years now, but was also active in Canada with investigations there. Antonio will talk today about plant survival in forestation projects, so the early stages of what hopefully become large and nice forests. Antonio, thank you very much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wim. Hello, good morning, everyone. I am Antonio Campo from the Universidad Politécnica of Valencia, Spain, and it is a pleasure for me to be here as part of the organizing team, together with well-renowned colleagues in the field of forestation and forest restoration. So I want to thank them for accepting the invitation. So my talk today is going to do with plantation failure. Plantation failure is a feared enemy to all of those practicing reforestation. So the title of my presentation is Addressing the Roots of Plantation Failure in Mediterranean Drylands, which is the margin for technical improvement. So to go over this topic, I've organized my presentation following this logic, this thread, where the presented concepts will be accompanied with the results of a study case of a real reforestation project. So in Mediterranean drylands, plantation failure is rather the norm than the exception. And if we are to improve survival, then we will need to understand plantation establishment. By doing that, we'll be able to identify the key drivers that condition such ecophysiological process. So these drivers can be many and very different in nature, shaping a complex system that needs to be properly analyzed in order to address the root of plantation establishment. So by doing that, we can identify the margin for improvement, for technical improvement in a given environmental context. So unlike previous presenters, I want to highlight that the spatio-temporal scale I'm going to deal with in my presentation is that of the program scale. So it's that concerning to the deployment of a specific reforestation project. Typically between 100 or several thousand hectares, 5,000 or maybe even more, typically that size in Mediterranean drylands. But also when looking at the seedling establishment, the focus requires smaller scales, typically of 1 or several square meters. So this is a change of scale as regard previous presentations. Okay, so as already mentioned, poor plantation performance in Mediterranean drylands is rather the norm. Why? Because of the biophysical factors. They configure a harsh environment characterized by very low irregular precipitation, not just low, but also irregular, very important. High temperatures, high evapotranspiration, and usually degraded soils, shallow soils, rocky soils. Also, topographic features are not favorable. So all of those configure a harsh environment. But not just the biophysical environment. When dealing with plantation, with dealing with reforestation, there is also a very important anthropogenic factors or anthropogenic-based factors. Many decisions taken during the planning stage, taken in the project, in the technical project, will be important, and not just the decisions during the planning stage, but also the actions or the implementation of the project, the works. All these factors are going to determine the rate of success of a given program. So key aspects related to species selection, zoning, proper planting and protection of the seedling from grazing, for instance, all of them will hold an important weight in the performance of the plantation several months or years later when we assess it. So harsh environments, together with unsuitable technical decisions, plus the many interactions between them, for instance, good seedling quality could be completely counterbalanced with a droughty summer. So all these factors, all of them end up with inadmissible low survival rates in many programs, like in the slide, or different programs of the Valencia region. So sometimes survival rates are below 50%, sometimes even below 20 or even 15%. What does it mean? Of course, it means a waste of money, time, work. But the most important thing from my point of view is the waste of the hopes that society ever put into a certain forestation project. So if we really want to cope with that, it is necessary to deeply understand plantation establishment, which is no other thing than an ecophysiological process. In this ecophysiological process, plant-water relations and carbon uptake and transformation by the seedlings are at the very core of the process. So this process was depicted by Bargues, a Canadian author, 30 years ago, into a very nice representation that has long been used in the field of plantation establishment. to illustrate the huge differences regarding root development and spread between a naturally established seedling and a newly planted one. Summarizing, root growth is urgently needed for a newly planted seedling because it will allow for water uptake. That in turn improves plant water potential and thus stimulates stomatal aperture, leaf conductance to carbon dioxide. So at the end, this sequence enhances photosynthesis. And photosynthesis will produce the basic substrate for new root growth to occur. So the feedback is positive and the established seedling survives. Otherwise, the seedling dies. The transcendence of such a basic or of such ecophysiological process is fundamental in reforestation or forestation projects, because all the objectives, all the targets, goals in a program rely on it. So the provision of ecosystem services, the decade on ecosystem restoration itself, socioeconomic indicators, the contribution to carbon sequestration, all of them fade away without a successful completion of the establishment. So for that reason, it is very important that we identify the key factors, specific variables that might contribute to the process of establishment in a given project. So this is the very first important point to address when improving plantation performance. In fact, there are a multitude of factors, variables that can affect this process, as reported by these authors, Liang et al. So, for the sake of simplicity, at the project scale, we can identify site and meteorological factors on the biophysical side of the factors, on the biophysical side of the drivers, but also we can identify project design decisions, the decisions taken therein, the work's execution or the implementation of such decision into the real spot, and also stock quality or seedling quality as anthropogenic related factors or variables. So within each set, there will be plenty of individual variables, of course. For instance, regarding site conditions or site consideration, soil properties is a broad set with many properties of the soil, like stoniness, shallowness, texture, so on. But also topographic features, slope, aspect, and local climate patterns, potential vegetation or plant associations, site productivity, all then would be at the end affecting seedling establishment. Also in the ecological set, within the ecological set, the meteorology is very important, as there are two critical moments related to the establishment process, which are the planting season weather, the weather during plantation, and also after planting droughts. In the plots shown in this slide, drawn from our study case, we can see for the one on the left that planting, which is the gray shaded area, took place mostly in a seasonal drought, winter drought, that fell within 2 rainy periods. So there were rain before and after, but during the planting season, it was mostly dry. So this was contributing to decreasing soil moisture, which is the blue line, decreasing soil moisture. So at the end of the planting season, probably there were very low levels of soil moisture. On the right hand, what we see is the issue of the interannual droughts. What we see is the temporal series of the drought index SPI for 10 years. Our study case will encompass 10 years. And what we see here is the alternance of very wet periods and dry periods. In our case, the vertical lines, these 4 vertical lines or these 3 vertical lines indicate when the plantation took place. So the plantation at the beginning began with a wet period, but what we can see here is that in the middle of the 10-year period, there was a huge drought. And we'll see later on how this affected our results. And seedling establishment, obviously, is not indifferent to these droughts, seasonal, either seasonal or interannual. In the anthropogenic set of the establishment factors, there are many decisions taken in the project during the planning stage. So appropriate zoning of the area is fundamental as it will condition species selection, species mixture, density, the site preparation techniques being chosen according to site limitation, and also the selection of protection and early growth promotion treatments. All of them must be coupled to the site and the species in consideration. So there are so many potential spaces for mistakes or for uncertainties when designing a reforestation project. And the same can be said for the implementation of the project. So different variables can be drawn in order to characterize proper planting and proper execution of the early growth promotion treatments or protection treatments like tree shelters or plantation itself and so on. Finally, the stock quality has long been a central topic when performing improvement of plantation performance. Stock quality is a broad concept that adds together a multitude of genetic, biological, morphological, physiological performance attributes, and all of them should be optimized and tuned according to the use and the user. So there are, again, a lot of variables, specific individual variables in this important set. So at the end, what we have is kind of an assemblage of many different variables, dozens, even hundreds of variables that differ in their nature, magnitude, scale, and all of them are potentially affecting plantation establishment in higher or lesser degree. This is represented, this graphical representation is represented in a real case, in a real study case here on the right, which is our study case, a reforestation project of about 700 hectares in eastern Spain, where we can see the red points or the reddish colors indicating higher mortality, and the yellow-green plots indicating mid to low mortality. Those are sampling plots where the mortality has been assessed. So what we see here is that if we are to identify the variables involved in this particular response, we cannot rely on simple relationships of just one or few variables with performance, because of the complex ecological interactions, the processes, the nonlinear functions that in turn are affected by a particular technique. So there are important interactions that will be different according to the site preparation or the election of a given cultural treatment. So we need proper tools, like in this case, artificial intelligence or machine learning tools, that can better fit nonlinear responses between predictors and performance. In our study case, we selected boosted regression trees modeling, which is a technique which combines the strength of regression trees and boosting. So for a given response mortality from our study site, the model can integrate several predictors. In our case, about 300 of predictors related to site, meteorological conditions, project, works, stock quality. So we got about 300 variables, and then we can produce a prediction surface for different split points. Actually, this modeling tool was very good. Here are the indicators of performance. So here on green color, you can see the correlation, the cross-validation correlation between the observed and the predicted values. So correlation coefficients of about 70 for the first year of plantation. I'm going to present three assessments, one after the first year. second one after the second year, and the third one after 10 years of planting. 25% of mortality in this first year, 50% of mortality this second year, and 75% of mortality 10 years after planting. So we need answers. We have questions, and we need to answer those questions about why this huge mortality. So we can go year by year, picking up the interesting results of our study. For instance, in the first year, 2008, what we see in this slide is the effect of planting date on mortality. So planting date caught about 10% of relative importance in the fitted model. What we see here is a partial dependent plot, which is mean-centered, so that 0 is the average mortality. Positive values indicate a higher mortality than the average, and negative values less mortality or higher survival. So for this variable, which is a variable from the technical set, so the execution, so there is it is a anthropogenic factor, because we choose when to plant. We can choose it. So there is an increase. What we see here is that there is an increase in mortality in the second half of the planting season. The planting season spanned from November 2007 to early February 2008. What we see here is the increase, the peak of mortality, more or less with coinciding with the lower soil moisture that was recorded by the sensors, by the various sensors in the site. So this is not surprising at all, because we see, as previously mentioned, we see rainfall falling before and after the planting season. So by late January, soil moisture was very dry. So you can see here the the soil water content during the summer drought, which is of course is much lower. So this information, together with that of the sensor, of course, could be very useful in order to identify critical thresholds and optimize plantation response. I also want to highlight the non-linearity of this function. Not just the technical, but also the ecological variables could be identified as important variables in this first year survival or first year mortality. We also identify soil depth and the percentage of sand in our analysis as variables affecting mortality. So what we can see here is an interesting threshold of about 33 centimeters for soil depth that clearly split the response. So areas or spots planted with shallow soils, in particular less than 33 centimeters, will improve or will increase mortality. And by the same, the sandy soils. So there is, in our case, sandy soils are related to deep soils. So that's why both functions were identified in the analysis. So the point here for these environmental variables, they are not technical, they are environmental, but the point here is that I know there is little room for improvement from soil texture or from soil depth if we have the parent rock below. But we can better adjust the reforestation technique. So this is just related to the environmental side, but we can improve reforestation success by adjusting the technique. For instance, avoiding planting, getting rid of planting on shallow spots. So that would be an interesting result. If we go to the second year, 2009, I remind you that it is 50% of mortality. So now you see more red dots than in the previous assessment of 2008. Here, the model identified some vegetation indexes taken out from land imagery as very important variables affecting mortality, with more than 15%. So here we have MCI and DMI, that both together are about 15% of relative importance. So what both plots in this slide show the partial response of mortality for moisture stress index and the normalized difference moisture index, showing higher mortality in greener and wetter soils. So this is unexpected. Yeah, how could be mortality increasing when we have more vegetation and when we have less water stress? So this is unexpected, and maybe it is indicating kind of a competition effect. Maybe we are planting in a shrubland area dominated by rock roses, rosmarinus, very competitive species. So probably bare soil was improving survival, especially in a particular wet period, because this assessment is done around this point. I'm pointing around this temporal point. So it was a very wet period, and during wet period, competition would have been increased instead of the facilitation effect of the shrubs. Actually, in the 10th year, so now red dots predominate. Here, what we can see is that again, satellite indexes got more importance than any other variables. Probably it was satellite vegetation indexes were gathering the impact of this severe drought. So you can see that the third assessment on the upper plot, you can see the red area, the severe drought, this historical drought affected the vegetation, and that was gathered by the vegetation indexes. So this year, these indexes are holding more than 40% of importance in total in the model, and indicates that these different NDVI type indexes were associated to lower mortality, as expected. So the higher the NDVI or the EVI or ARVI, the higher the survival and the lower the mortality. So under these new conditions, facilitation effect would have been higher than competition effect of the shrubs. So yes, summarizing, what we can totalize for the different sets of variables. So we can have a depiction of the general contribution of a given factor into plantation failure. So in our study case, we can see that for the first year, this is mortality, this is the importance, the explained importance. So we can see that about 22% of the mortality can be attributed to anthropogenic reasons. And this percentage decreased after 10th years because of the severe drought. So only 10% of this 78% of mortality was explained by anthropogenic causes. Here, again, what we can see is that the meteorology was very important during the first year because of the importance of the planting season, but then meteorology decreased between 2008 and 10 years later. And the meteorological drought, to our surprise, didn't get too much importance, likely because it was held by the satellite indexes that increased their importance from the beginning to the 10th year of plantation. So here we see the project design was very important, more important than the execution of the works. So some decisions taken in the project have more impact on mortality than the planting itself, or proper execution, or proper installation of cultural treatments, protection treatments, and so on. So just to conclude, addressing plantation failure is very important because in the short term, what we can do is an assessment, a judgment about the fitness of a given reforestation program, about the project, the adequacy of the project, and the technical measures in the project, but also an adequacy of the execution. So it is kind of a quality control, so we can see if the execution, the works are coupled to the meteorological constraints, or if there is a loss of stock quality due to improper handling. Also, we can identify contractors' liability in the outcomes, also to identify the fitness of the stock quality to site conditions and the impact of meteorology. But on the midterm, we can improve, we can adapt the technique to the conditions. So we have an improvement for both the technique and also to fine tune the stock quality according to the biological, physiological, even genetic properties. So we can do a better zoning by identifying indexes that are directly related to establishment. We can optimize density, species mixture. We can also select and justify why we are selecting given treatments for protection and early growth treatment, like hydrogels. Why we need hydrogels, or why do we need tubes or tree shelters or mulches or so on, and why selecting them and why they should be useful. And also the optimization of the works according to dates, topography, soil moisture condition, and so on. But on the long run, this is needed in order to ensure, to ascertain the provision of ecosystem services. So monitoring the plantation will for sure affect the whole socio-ecological system. So at the end, as Dr. Zhu has commented in his presentation, the relevant benefits or services of new systems need to be monitored. So as Aida said too, it is not planting trees, but growing trees. So on the long run, we need to assess or to know how they are growing, how they are doing. And of course, relating all of them to the social aspects. So that's all. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I have to say that this work is part of a PhD thesis of Guillem Segura, and me and Dr. Hermoso are co-supervisors of this work. Thank you very much, and if you have any question, please do not hesitate to say.
Thank you very much, Antonio, for this splendid presentation. Indeed, we have some questions that have come in, and we have a few minutes time left to answer them even. So the first question is of Francisco Ruiz. Apart from the different factors you showed, how much do you think the phytosanitary status of the plant influences the failure of afforestation? And do you consider this as a major issue?
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, this is important. Actually, if you are referring to the phytosanitary status of the plant, it is part of the biological quality. So when I talk about seedling quality, I said genetic, biological, morphological, physiological, and performance attributes. Within the biological set of seedling quality, we have both mycorrhiza, rest of mycorrhiza, the species, but also let's say the black part of the biology, which is the biological part, which is the presence of disease, like Fusarium or many other pests and disease that could be in the planting stock. So of course, if we are to use a stock quality, a good quality stock, we need to have the phytosanitary passport, which is compulsory for many for the production of for the commercialization, marketing seedlings within the EU. So that will be an important factor, and that will be a variable. Again, you can you have to usually if you are doing things right, you don't have to deal with this issue because supposedly the seedlings will be clean of any pathogen. But if you want to test, maybe you want to test several treatments of infestation or so on, of course, that would be very important, and that should be one of the many variables that would be included into the analysis. But usually when you want to address this point, then you go to specific studies of biological infestation and field response. But probably when you integrate this into the whole system, maybe I'm afraid that at the end it is not going to be so relevant, so important. I don't know, it's just to check.
Thank you, Antonio. Ashley Brown has a question. We have found that planting works best in Murcia when you dig large holes with a machine, add compost to the hole, and mulch around the base of the tree with cardboard. Is that according to your experience as well, from your investigation?
Well, thank you very much. Usually, you have the best answer to this question is to go back and to have a look to the establishment process of Bargues. So you always have to think. I mean, there are no receipts for plantation establishment. There are no receipts. There are no writing protocols or guidelines. There are just, so you always have to think. So you have to think about how your seedling in your particular site is going to cope with root growth. Obviously, if you have a low infiltration, a low soil water infiltration capacity because of the degraded compacted soil, you will need to open big holes. Why? Because you will increase soil infiltration and soil storage capacity of water in the rainy season. For sure, this will work much better than shallow or handmade holes with a hoe or any other tool, manual tool. So sure, but always think on coupling species physiology with the site conditions. And why adding compost? So if we want to add what? So you have to ask yourself, why do I want to add compost to the hole? Are you going to increase water, which is the main limitation at the very short time after planting? Do you think compost is going to increase water availability? Yes, well, it is expectedly, it is organic matter. So water retention of the organic matter is higher than any other elements of the soil. So for this point, I would say yes, but my experience with compost is that they also add salts, depending on the compost origin. But in many cases, compost are salty products, and salt is an enemy of water availability. So what I've seen in some examples is that adding compost to the holes is killing trees because you are increasing the osmotic water retention of the soil. So at the end, you are putting organic matter, but also salts into the hole. And finally, the cardboard, I think it is related to protection from sun, right? I guess. Otherwise, please correct me. Yeah, protecting seedlings from sun is, in principle, it is okay, but it depends on the species. Again, you have to think about the species. And there is not an Aleppo pine, which is very typical in Murcia. An Aleppo pine is an Heliophilus species. It needs sun for full growth, for full root growth, for full root development. So protecting Aleppo pine seedlings from sun can have negative consequences. But if you are planting a holm oak or another hardwood, which is a species typical of a higher level of the forest ecosystem succession, it is typical from a K species, maybe protecting it from sunshine would be better. So summarizing, it is compulsory. You have to think about how to improve your plantation the ecophysiological process of plantation establishment. You have to think at that level. Otherwise, you won't be able to improve your reforestation, your plantation performance.
Thank you very much, Antonio. We have come at the end of the available time. I will mute this for a second. We have come at the end of the available time for your presentation and the questions. So we will go to our fourth speaker today, who is Mohamed Dawoud. Mohamed Dawoud is a civil engineer and PhD from the Ain Shams University through a joint program with the Colorado State University. Since 1991, he is researcher and consultant on groundwater aquifers, artificial recharge with desalinated water, reuse of treated sewage, effluent, desalination technology, and water resources management. So very related to what you just mentioned, water availability and salt in the region of the roots. His current research includes water supply and demand, solar desalination, groundwater management, aquifer storage and recovery, and reuse of treated sewage effluent in many countries, such as Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, Mali, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Mohamed is currently a water resources advisor with the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi. This presentation is particularly interesting because it helps us to open our minds to possibilities of forestation in very adverse conditions. Many of you have already launched questions in the chat box on possibilities for forestation in the Sahara, for example. Now, the Abu Dhabi Emirate has about 242,000 hectares of forest, which contain nearly 20 million trees, 80% of which are native trees. And these forests have many benefits, including protecting vital infrastructure, such as protecting roads from sand encroachment, providing habitats for animals, and improving the quality of life for the residents of Abu Dhabi. However, these forests are planted forests, and they cannot survive in the local climatic conditions without continuous management and regular irrigation. Mohamed, sorry.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Mohamed will give us insights in the water management and along with that, the energy needs related to the forest in Abu Dhabi. Remember that you have the occasion to launch your questions to Dr. Dawoud in the chat box of this YouTube channel. Mr. Dawoud, thank you for being here with us today. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Wim. Thanks for the organizer for inviting me to this very important event and interesting event. I will present today about our case study in Abu Dhabi. We are an arid region, arid desert and sandy dune region, so we don't have any natural forestry area, but most of these areas are afforested areas, so it have been cultivated with native species and indigenous species, and it's irrigated by groundwater, desalinated water, and sometimes in many minor cases, treated wastewater. As mentioned by Wim, we have in Abu Dhabi Emirate at present about 540 afforested area. This covers about 242,000 hectares and comprising about 3.45% out of the total Abu Dhabi Emirate main land area. This is, of course, excluding the islands area. Out of this, we have about 540 afforested areas. There are also about 320 forests, forested area, of course, and 55 roads and belts and gate roads to access these areas. And we have 73 farms, and this farm is mainly used to cultivate fooders for the wildlife animals like gazelle, Arabian oryx, and other animals. And we do have about 44 assets plantation for date palms and other native species. We have more than 20 million trees, either both native and non-native species. Native trees comprises about 88% out of the total number of the this 20 million. To manage efficiently this forest sector, we started to develop a forestry strategy covering 6 main topics. The first one is the water resources efficiency and the hierarchy, also including non-native trees species and how we can increase the non-native, minimize the non-native trees and increase the native trees. Financial and contractual management. Most, if not all, of these forests are managed and operated by a private sector and mostly outsourced by the government by annual contract with a contractor, big contractor in Abu Dhabi Emirate, who is taking care about the management and managing all the assets and resources of this forest sector. Also, we are caring about the diversification of activities within the forest because we are looking now for environmental tourist to change it to environmental tourist sector and increasing the number of tourists and the visitors, especially the students either from the universities or school, to visit this natural area and have more educational sessions and lessons within it. Also, we are speaking about the decommissioning of some unused forests or low growth forests, which we don't have enough water resources for irrigation or costing us a lot of money because there is no access, enough access route or covered by sandy dune encroachment or movement. This is, as I mentioned, it have including a lot, hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of species, wildlife animal species, rabbits, Arabian gazelle, sand gazelle, Arabian oryx, and many birds and another wildlife animals in this forestry sectors. The key messages which we would like to discuss today are the drivers and the pressure, the state and the impacts, and also the response of the government to mitigate the pressure of this sector. In terms of drivers, one of the drivers for increasing the number of forests and increase the forest sector is the urbanization and the desert. We are in a desert area, and although urbanization play a key role in the emergency forest in Abu Dhabi Emirate, but it's also affecting the long-term sustainability of this forest. So we started now to have a plan, very clear plan, to efficiently manage this and minimize cutting of the trees and minimize demolishing of this forest and using it as part from the urbanization, or even sometimes part from the agriculture sector to increase the agriculture areas. The pressure we have many pressures actually facing and challenging facing the Abu Dhabi forestry sector. One of the most challenging and the pressure is the groundwater depletion. Abu Dhabi Emirate, we have two aquifer systems. We have the shallow groundwater aquifer system and we have the deep groundwater aquifer system. All the water or the irrigation water is utilized from the shallow aquifer system, which is non-renewable aquifer system. And at present, the evapotranspiration, because it is arid region, it's more than 1,900 millimeter per year. However, the average annual rainfall is less than 60 millimeter per year. So we are providing all this sector with groundwater, and it consumes about 315 million cubic of groundwater a year. And recently, it had been increased to 593 million cubic meter in 2020. So there is a lot of pressure on the groundwater aquifer in this area because the groundwater is not renewable aquifer system, and we don't have any recharge to this aquifer. The groundwater salinity is increased and affecting the growth of the plants and trees in this area. The second issue is the financial pressure. As I mentioned, this sector is managed by a contractor and outsourced all the management of the assets. We have hundreds of buildings. We have something like 7,000 wells. We have more than 1,000 storage tanks for water distribution over this forested area. All this sector is managed and outsourced to be managed by and operated by a big contractor in Abu Dhabi Emirate, and it costs millions and millions. Mostly it's something like more than 500 million dirham a year. 1 dirham is equal to $3.675. So we are speaking about mostly something like more than $150 million a year for the operational and maintenance and water supply and the maintenance of irrigation system and the maintenance of the assets existing within this forestry sector. So this is big pressure for the government to spend this amount of money every year for this sector. The second issue is the culture pressure. The forest in Abu Dhabi Emirate is considered as part from the heritage of the Emirate, and it is part from the culture. So, however, it's costing a lot of money. However, it needs a lot of management, and it's using a lot of groundwater and water resources. But still, it is part from our culture, it's part from our heritage, and we cannot easily remove or leave this part from our heritage. So, this is also a big challenge for us, and how we can keep them and maintain them running. In the same time, how we can save water, how we can save the money in operating and the management of this big sector. The second issue is the uncontrolled breeding. Unfortunately, we have the very big increasing and the growth in the gazelle and Arabian oryx in this area. So there is a lot of uncontrolled breeding by captive wildlife population within the forestry emirate. Recently, we started to use this number of wildlife animals and giving it as a precedent for some national UAE national staff to use them in their own private farms or own private forestry. But also the feeding and producing and providing them with fresh water for drinking for this big number of wildlife animals is a big challenge for us. The response, how the government started now to efficiently manage their this is forestry sector. So we started with the existing. The most of the response at present is to use this as a carbon credit for us, and using the forestry sector to increase, or to minimize the carbon emission for the emirate in general. Also, we started now to increase the number of native species and use solar power to manage the pumping and pumping station and pumping wells and the pumps in these wells, and to replace the existing diesel generator or diesel pumping with solar and electricity pumping to minimize the carbon emission, and also to reduce the environmental impacts of this sector. Meanwhile, also, we started to develop a very comprehensive database for the Abu Dhabi wildlife, animals, and forestry sector. So we have now a comprehensive database, including all the layout maps for this, the distribution, geographical distribution for this forest, the statistics about the number of plantation and the species used in this, and also the wildlife, animals, and forestry, and the birds exist in this one. And with this all the, and also the classification of this forestry sector, we started to classify them to productive, non-productive, and according to the suitability of the soil and the suitability of the groundwater for irrigation, and the other alternative used for irrigating this big forestry sector. So we have now at present a very comprehensive database, including all the information and the maps and the layouts and the classification of all these forests at present. Utilizing alternative water resources is very important part from our management plan now for the forestry. We started to replace the existing groundwater with treated wastewater, and also to save the desalinated water. Desalinated water is very expensive, and 1 cubic meter of desalinated water used for irrigation in the forestry sector is costing us something like 11 dirham, which is about $2.7. This is very important part of how we can improve efficiently the water resources. So we started to reduce using desalinated water only in very minor cases where there is no any other alternative. But we are mainly relying now on groundwater, and we started to replace even the groundwater with treated wastewater. In Abu Dhabi Emirate, we have about 32 treatment plants producing about 350 million cubic meter. Out of this figure, about 55% is discharging back either to the environment or to the Gulf, Arabian Gulf. So we started to build infrastructure to transfer the water from the treatment plants to the nearest forest to be utilized by the forest, and we are planning now to reach zero discharge of treated wastewater to the environment by 2021, September 2021. All the infrastructure will be completed, and we will start to stop discharging any treated wastewater to environment and using it for irrigation of farms and forests. We will irrigate more than 32 afforested area, big afforested area with treated wastewater. At present, we are using about only 9% of the water from, and the irrigation is coming from treated wastewater. By the end of 2021, September 2021, additional 360,000 cubic meter of treated wastewater will be used for irrigating of this afforested area. So we will demolish something like 2,300 wells will be abandoned and will not be used anymore, and the groundwater will be reduced dramatically by about 30%. Because, as I mentioned, we have about at present more than 7,000 wells in this forested areas. Reducing desalination, as I mentioned, we started since 2015 to reduce the desalinated water because it is very costly, and we started also a plan to recycling the green waste. So all the green waste captured and collected from this forestry sector is recycled and used to produce compost. And now we are producing about 30 tons per year of compost used in improving the soil quality in this forest, using about 6 million, and our target is to reach 2 million cubic meter per year of desalinated in the forestry sector by 2020. With this, I can say that the forestry, as I mentioned, is part from our heritage. It is a forested area, exists in the middle of nowhere in a very harsh condition in arid region, and it is provided with groundwater, and the groundwater is deteriorated, and the quality is becoming day after day and year after year more saline. So we started to replace it with treated wastewater, and we are trying now to change the forested area to a productive by increasing the cultivated areas with fodders and other trees which can produce wood. And we are now trying to minimize the cost of the annual cost of the management from 540 million dirham a year to less than 350 by 2025. With this, I can say thank you very much, and thanks for the organizer for this interesting event. I'm ready for any question and any clarification.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dawoud. That was really a very interesting insight in what very few people know about planting forests in a region like the Arab Peninsula. We do have several questions from the public. First question from Karim Mapti. Are you using water harvesting techniques in deserts? And if yes, what kind of water harvesting techniques are you using?
We are not using water harvest because most of this, or not most, all of our forestry sector or our forested areas exist in the middle of nowhere, as I mentioned, in a very sandy dune area. Within sandy dune areas and with a very rare rainfall events, and the frequency of rainfall is very minor, only 2 or 3 times a year. So with very minimal quantities, less than 60 millimeter per year, which is very minimal. However, the evaporation is very high and it is flat with sandy dune areas, so we cannot use any harvesting technique. But we are using now new innovative technology for irrigation to minimize the water use by using subsurface irrigation, by using dripper irrigation, and also automated and computerized irrigation system and fertigation system. We are trying to control the water resources, and we have now a detection system to detect the leaks from the main pipelines transferring the water from the well fields to the forests. Also, we are working now, as I mentioned, to replace the groundwater and desalinated water with treated wastewater, and we will use by September 2020 about something like 360,000 cubic meter a day, which is something like 140 million cubic meter a year in a forested area. So we are, and harvesting is very non-renewable, either technically or economically or even environmentally in our condition, because we are desert, sandy dune, flat areas, so the harvesting is very difficult.
Okay, related to this question, Karim has pointed out what he actually had in mind. Ways to retain the rainwater when it falls and recharge the water aquifer. And also he's asking about techniques that avoid erosion.
But what erosion?
Yeah, I imagine that erosion is, he's referring probably to wind erosion, because I think rainfall erosion will not be very important in your region.
As I mentioned, the recharge to aquifer is very minimal, very rare, because of the rainfall is 60 millimeter a year, and the frequency is sometimes 3 days, 4 days a year between January, February, and March. And it's very low amount of rainfall, and we cannot, the recharge to aquifer is very minimal, and our monitoring system indicating sometimes it is few centimeters a year from the rainfall events. If we have even heavy rainfall events, and the frequency is high. Other than this, we don't have a lot of recharge for the aquifer system, unfortunately.
Okay. Here, next question. What are your experiences with capillary water, and should we not have our full focus on this in the Sahara?
Sure. We are caring about the capillary water, and as I mentioned, we started to examine many innovative technology for irrigation, including the subsurface dripping, the subsurface leaky pipes, to minimize even the accumulation of the salts on the surface, because the groundwater used is saline. But if anyone have a new ideas how we can, Hani can help us with the new innovative technology to improve the water and the irrigation water used in our forestry, we are open-minded to share this knowledge and share innovation, and to make a pilot project and test it in our forestry sector.
Thank you very much. I think this is an opportunity for collaboration between the public and our speaker. Kieran Dominic is back with the next question. How much water per tree per year is used on average?
It depends. It depends on that and the type of plantation and the trees itself. As I mentioned, we have more than 50 plant species. We have dead palm, we have rock, we have hundreds of trees of tree species. So I can give you only one example for. Liter per day per tree, but we have another native species which are used far less of this amount of water. So it depends on the species itself, and we have hundreds of species in our plant area, so it depends.
Sorry, Dr. Dawoud, the connection was bad just at the moment when you mentioned the number of liters for that specific species. Can you repeat how many liters?
The dead palm it ranges between 100 liter in winter to 150 liter per. The same, it depends on the native species, the plant species itself. So because, as I mentioned, we have more than 100 species in our forestry. So it depends. We have shrubs, we have trees, we have small trees, we have big trees. So it depends.
Okay. Anyone who wants more detail on water consumption of the species that are used in Abu Dhabi is invited to send us an email, and we will make sure that Dr. Dawoud receives his email and you get the appropriate feedback. EcoSmart Farming is pointing out that they use the water box in the desert with success. I don't know if you have any
I heard about this water box. I saw it in one of the exhibitions. Can you hear me?
No, the connection was lost just for 10 seconds or so.
For the water box, I saw it myself in Oman, in one of the exhibitions in Oman before the COVID lockdown. I was in Oman in a conference, and I saw this water box, and we started to use it as a pilot project in cooperation with ICRAF, International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, and also we are using another technology for minimizing the water use in irrigation. Yes, I am aware about this water box, and I'm also open to cooperate with this who's asking this question, or this company, I don't know. And if he can contact me, and we can check if we can cooperate in the future.
Okay, Ashley Brown is back with an observation related to also to the previous presentation of Professor Del Campo regarding saline water and salt and how it affects plants. She mentions that Habiba organic farm in Egypt, plant that removes salt from the saline water. Are you familiar with that, Dr. Dawoud?
Actually, they are using many technologies like the magnetic technology to minimize the salinity effect on the growth. But now we try a pilot project on using this technology for minimizing the salinity by using magnetic way. Up till now, the results is not promising, and we don't have enough information to have evidence about the satisfactory of this technology. However, we have a pilot project also with International Center for Biosaline Agriculture. But sure, the salinity affecting the growth and also affecting the soil salinity, and sometimes in some areas, because we are irrigating with water with the salinity something like 15,000 ppm, so we have a salt crust at the surface during the irrigation, and sometimes during the winter when it rains, it comes and washing this salinity, affecting the mortality rate of the species and or the plantation. And we have a lot of mortality during the winter, during the rainy seasons, because of the washing the salinity from the salt crust at the surface and affecting the root zone. So this is also one of the challenges that we are facing. So what we are looking now is to have a subsurface system to minimize the salt crust accumulation on the surface of the in the areas where we have a groundwater with high salinity.
So actually, when plants are suffering more is during the rainy season.
Yes, because
Due to the
there is a
salt.
surface, there is a crust of saline at the surface, and when the rain that comes, it washes this salinity and push it in the root zone. So we have a lot of mortality in some trees in the area which we are irrigating with saline water.
Very interesting. Very
Yes.
surprising. Okay, thank you. Next question from Mr. Kerkman. How are you mitigating the expected effects of future climate change and regional temperature increases?
It is a big challenge all over the world, not only for Abu Dhabi and the arid region, especially in the arid region.
Certainly.
And we are already arid region, so we are suffering from the lack of water resources and the scarce of water resources, and also the non-recharge to the aquifer system. So most of our aquifer system are non-renewable aquifer systems. So we are putting now about a lot of mitigation measures to mitigate and to overcome the effect of climate changes, because the climate change will not only affect the environmental sector, but we are, as an arid region, we are about 30% from our production is coming from the desalination plants, and this used either for irrigation or for domestic water use. And most of the intakes exist in a very shallow area on the Arabian Gulf. Any increase in the seawater will immediately affect all the intakes of these desalination plants. Meanwhile, we are discharging now about, as I mentioned, 45% out of the total treated wastewater produced in Abu Dhabi Emirate. Our plan is to build more infrastructure to transfer this water to the nearest forested areas and the forest. And by September 2021, we will irrigate about 4,000 farms with treated wastewater and more than 32 afforested plots, big afforested plots, with discharging about 500 cubic meter of treated wastewater to the Gulf, which will also have a lot of environmental impact on the refreshment of the marine water. And we have a lot of mitigation measures, and also to minimize, as I mentioned, using the diesel generators and the diesel pumps, and to replace it with solar desalination or pumps operated by solar desalination. We have something like now 300 pumps as a pilot project operated by solar desalination, and our plan is to increase the use of solar desalination in the future, and also to minimize the water pumping, so we are minimizing the energy consumption.
Great. One final question from Carol de Vos. Have you used hydrogels?
We used many soil amendment and soil additive material to improve the water holding capacity of the soil and to minimize the water. Not only hydrogel, but we have a lot of materials. We test even some rocks coming from Turkey, crashed and coming from Turkey, and we have many pilot projects, but still we have some concerns about the results. But also, as I mentioned to Carlo or whoever, we are open-minded to share the knowledge. If you use it in any pilot project or any area, and you have already approved the results, please share it with us, and we are ready to test it here in Abu Dhabi.
Okay. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Dawoud, for answering these questions from the public and for enlightening us about forestation in these very harsh conditions. It's time already to pass to our last speaker, who is Ken Broad. Ken Broad is maybe my personal hero. Ken Broad is an entrepreneur who has turned the fight against climate change and land degradation into business. Ken was co-founding director of Auscarbon, a privately owned company that specializes in establishing large-scale, low-cost biodiverse carbon sinks by revegetating degraded areas in the Western Australian wheat belt. He was also a co-founding director of Carbon Neutral, which supports businesses to measure, reduce, and offset carbon emissions. Thanks to Kent, more than 12,000 hectares of biodiverse vegetation was established in the Yarra Yarra corridor. Kent is also an expert in carbon credits earned in forestation projects. He was involved in establishing the first gold standard project in Australia, developed numerous offsetting initiatives, among those a $20 million 30-year tender from an eastern state's utility to offset their emissions. Kent is now running Outback Carbon, a company with a vision to transform rural communities and restore the environment through the return of carbon capital. I encourage you to ask your questions to Kent in our chat box and for answering during the question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Kent, thank you so much for offering us some of your evening time. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much there, Bim, and I feel quite humbled to be joining this this symposium and such esteemed scientists from around the world. It's just wonderful to be involved, and we really got a lot out of each of them actually, and we thought we had it pretty tough here in Australia. So yeah, it's quite a feat for sure. What they've achieved, and just a quick thought too on the COVID-19 around the world. Just got to start my presentation. Can you hear me all right there? It's not starting for some reason. Can you hear me all right, Bim? You're on mute, Bim, sorry.
We can see the presentation, but not in full screen mode. If you can go to the bottom right of the PowerPoint window and push it on full screen.
Yeah, it's I'm on there. I've gone to that, but it's not live.
Okay. If it's not, it doesn't work for you, we can just as well read it as it is now. It's the text is somewhat smaller, but than if it would be full screen. But it works.
But I can't move it along. That's my point. Hang on, I'll just
okay.
I'll just go to.
Yes, there you are.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, so it looks like we're live. Sorry about that. Slight technicality. Thank you. So I'll just move to my first slide, and just to give a bit of perspective about down under, if you like, in the Australian continent, and just rehashing the COVID-19. I hope everyone's doing as well as can be expected in different parts of the world. Being an island continent, we have been very fortunate so far, and especially here in WA. So I really feel for those countries in particular that are suffering badly at the moment. So as you can see there, the continent of Australia and the West Australian part of it, of Australia, is what we're talking about tonight. In particular, I don't know whether you can see my cursor here on the edge of what we call the Southwest Land Division. So this is the southwest corner of the Australian continent and of WA. and there's approximately 18 million hectares in this southwest corner, is what we call the wheat belt, and there's between 80 and 90 million in the rest of WA, so it's quite a big state. And this area, the rest of the state outside the wheat belt, is what we call the rangelands. We've got a tropics up here in the north, but anything south of the tropics would be sort of like a 200 millimetre rainfall annual. And in the wheat belt in Western Australia, which I'll talk a bit more about in terms of rainfall, we're looking at between 150 and 250 millimetres per year in the growing season. At Outback Carbon, we have got a lot of our inspiration from the first Australians. I've been here for 60,000 plus years. And recently, well, Bill Gamage's book, The Biggest Estate on Earth, has been around for a while. But recently, Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe has been put out. And if you're interested in what they have to say, they describe how really they were the original carbon farmers, they regenerative farmers, if you like, as well. They used the cool burning techniques to modify the environment over millennia, and basically built up the soil carbon and the vegetation stocks accordingly, mainly with grasslands. And they're also the original bakers of bread, going back tens of thousands of years, and sophisticated fish traps that have been found thousands of years old, so engineering. So we get a lot of our inspiration from them, and how we can look back on their techniques to regenerate our landscape. Because we've got a real problem here in this wheat belt area of the southwest of Western Australia. It's been cleared in the last, since European settlement 200 years ago. We've over-cleared our landscape between 90 and 95%. And hopefully you can see these small areas on the screen, which is what we call a remnant vegetation. So that is those areas that have not been cleared. However, they're in degrees of degradation. There wouldn't be too many of that natural bush, that natural vegetation that is pristine and got all the biodiversity benefits in there. They've either been grazed or had fires through them. So, but with all that 95% cleared, we have a great opportunity to basically regenerate, to revegetate, which is what we do. In particular, it's quite critical in the southwest here. We've got a bit of a rainfall problem, and we have lost more than 20% of our winter rainfall. It's a Mediterranean climate here in the southwest, and so our winter rainfall, which is predominantly our growing season, we have lost more than 20% since the 70s. And what the Bureau of Meteorology is telling us is that the ice heights are coming down in a southwesterly direction. So those areas that were, say, 200 millimetres that I explained before that were in the rangelands is now creeping into the southwest land division. So there was a paper done 7 years ago that I highlight there, which put forward a hypothesis that it was to do with both clearing, over-clearing, which I've explained, and climate change. And they basically recognised that it was nearly 60% due to over-clearing and about 40% due to climate change. So because 60% is put down to clearing, it just goes to show that returning that vegetation will hopefully get that winter rainfall back up. And the same people are also doing some experiments about areas of revegetation that we do, even as little as 50 hectares, may make a measurable difference of the rainfall events that come through. We've also got a salt problem here with the clearing. We've got quite shallow soils, very ancient, very brittle soils. And what we've found with the over-clearing is that the water table has risen, and the salt is left on the surface with the evaporation of the water. And we've got massive problems there. I'm not sure whether you can see that graph there, but it's 1 million hectares shown as salt affected in the year 2000. Pardon me. There's been no work done for 20 years, but we're just currently having an audit done by the Ag Department to find out if there's more now than then. with the drying trend, that possibly that curve has flattened out a bit, but all evidence is pointing towards probably a doubling of that 1 million hectares. So we could have upwards of 2 million hectares available for revegetation with salt-tolerant species. And you can see there the Auditor General's scathing report of just how much damage has been done and the economic losses. We're also having significant wind erosion events. As you can see there in that big paddock picture, that even during the winter, during our growing season, we're getting significant dust storms. And you may have seen last year in the eastern of Australia, some massive wind events where the dust actually ended up in the New Zealand Alps. So we're having more and more of these massive wind events that is doing untold damage. The small photo on your left there is of a wheat crop. In fact, they're just little wheat plants, and you can see a little grain of wheat that's sprouted with roots, and the soil profile has been blown away. So we've lost, I don't know, 4 or 5 centimetres of topsoil there with that particular event. So real problems there with the lack of trees through the landscape. So that's the desertification, deforestation problem we've got. So the solution which we've come up with, and we're inspired, as I said, not only by the first Australians, but also Al Gore, who came through to Perth in 2006 with his Inconvenient Truth, that we thought, well, we can get paid to revegetate these degraded landscapes. And so carbon credits is what we're using for that. And so the solution there is revegetation. And the methodology we use is through the federal government's reforestation by environmental or mallee plantings. So just a quick summary of what Vim mentioned about the 12,000 hectares. We managed to do this starting in 2008. And you may not remember, but Australia was pretty much leading the world with climate mitigation. In the 2007 federal election, both political parties took an emissions trading scheme to the election. But then so the carbon industry was really on a drive, and that's where these first 2008, 2009, 3,000 hectares went in each year. And then we won a significant tender for an eastern states energy and water utility to offset $20 million tender for that. And so we managed to try and utilise all our projects with local contractors. And a lot of these contractors and consultants we still have a long-term relationship with. And so Outback Carbon, what do we do? How does it work? Well, we basically are the facilitator between the landowner, the land steward, and the emitter who needs the carbon credits to be generated from that land. So Outback Carbon utilises the capital from the emitter to pay the landowner either in cash per year, or they get a share of the carbon credits, the carbon offsets, and the emitter gets their share of the carbon credits with the amount of capital that they put up to establish each project. So just quickly, each project in Australia, we call our carbon credit or carbon offset, we call it an ACU, an Australian Carbon Credit Unit. It's got a crediting life of 25 years under the methodology. Obviously, it's a carbon capture and storage. There's 2 permanence periods. There's a 25-year permanence and there's an 100-year permanence, and the corresponding decrease in ACUs. If you only choose 25 years, you lose 20% off the top for conservative means. And you've got the co-benefits here of the salt and the wind and water erosion lessening that. I was asked to present a bit of data on these co-benefits, both the social, economic and environmental. And a lot of it is proprietary information from the previous company I worked with. And there is an ongoing study at the moment to give a lot of that sort of data backing up what we say that we've got lots of co-benefits with these projects besides the key thing of sequestering carbon. We try as much as we can to encourage Indigenous businesses to be involved, either as a business or individual employment. And of course, also for just general rural employment across regional Australia. And a lot of, obviously, reinvestment goes back into these rural areas in Western Australia. So just briefly how it works. As I said, the methodology is very rigorous. It's one of many different sorts of methodologies under the Australian government's regime, the Carbon Farming Initiative. The one we use is the Emissions Reduction Fund method, reforestation by environmental or mallee plantings. A couple of options there. We either pay the landowner to rent the land, or we come up with a value where they share a percentage of the accus that are generated from that land for the period of the project life. The other option is to purchase land. If the farmer's actually had enough and wants to get going, leave the industry, we can look to either have emitters or investors to purchase the land. There's two configurations, a narrow or block planting. Generally the belt planting is to stop the wind erosion, and so they have large interrows that they can just do their normal farming agriculture in, and the block planting would be more in those areas where you want to reduce the salt, or in areas that they can't utilise properly for their agriculture. Right from the start, we chose a biodiverse model, so we didn't want a monoculture, if you like. We wanted to replicate what was there before through millennia, and we also thought that puts in a base resilience to the model. Mitigating climate change with this, we've endeavoured to use a few species further from drier areas, which have already become adapted with a drying trend. And also it gives a lot of resilience for any fire that comes through. It should be able to regenerate using the native species that we've chosen. As I mentioned, there's two permanence periods, the 25 years and 100 years. We encourage especially regenerative farmers. They are looking to perhaps revegetate or get 20 to 30% of their area to increase their tree canopy by 20 to 30%. And it was interesting to hear Aida mention that there's been a bit of work done on what that optimal percentage is for maximum, sustainability and resilience and profitability, all the words that we like to mention. And so the 25 years are delivered annually over that 25-year period, the carbon credits there. Costs, a couple of just very back of the envelope average costs, about 1,200 Australian dollars a hectare. It's generally spent in those first couple of years of establishment. And that includes obviously the methodology, getting the approval for that and registering it. Collecting seeds, we do both direct seeding and we use seedlings as well in the project, and also all the other work that goes with registering the project. So the interest holders, the carbon rights, carbon covenant. WA in particular has a very comprehensive Carbon Rights Act legislation that goes on the title to the land, and so the governance and the rigour there to make sure the carbon stays there is very good. There's what we call the Clean Energy Regulator. That's the federal government agency that handles and manages the whole program. So it includes registering with that. And then we've got the ongoing costs of management. As I say, the $50 a hectare, the setup costs, registering and everything, and then $30 a year per year from then on. And management includes all the usual things with monitoring and landowner management. There's the site inspections post-project establishment. Generally, we find, and it's all rain-fed forestry. There's no irrigation. So basically, once the seedling or the seed is planted, it's on its own. It just gets that winter rainfall, and then even summer rainfall can be very beneficial. But we've found that as long as the forest survives, or the seedlings and the seeds survive the first 2 summers, they pretty much they're on their own, like they're successful. There's not too much going to stop them from them. So the initial worry are goats, feral goats, rabbits, and obviously grazing from neighbours' sheep or whatnot. Fire is not really an issue in the initial stages. We do have a lot of fire break and a fire management program. And there are some weeds that may need controlling. And as I say, that the pests there, and insect damage is another one in those first couple of years. Just the normal registration, reporting and record keeping that I've mentioned. And you've got shire rates and legals, insurances and admin. And just a really back of the envelope, as I say, production of carbon credits per hectare here in WA. We look at 150 tonne or 150 carbon dioxide equivalents per hectare over 25 years. So a 1,000 hectare program will produce 152,000 ACCUs over the project life. Just quickly, and I won't go into too much detail here, just referring back to that Australia were very proactive 10 years ago, and since then it's become a real political football, and there's really no impetus to about mitigating climate change now, unfortunately, and they've really put it back on voluntary reduction and companies to do it themselves, and so it's been really tough these last 10 years to build on that momentum that was started back 10 years ago. Things are starting to move, but politically it's still a very difficult situation, and unfortunately it's taking a long time. Outback Carbon, just quickly, we're a small West Australian Perth-based company, and as I say, we facilitate bringing the two parties together, both the landowner, the farmers, and the industry emitters. We obviously share a passion for solving climate change. We really do think we're in a climate emergency, and it's really, you know, we've got the local problem here as well as it being a global problem. We've definitely got it here in Australia. And we've got a strong belief in working with regenerative farmers to improve, you know, basically the whole ecosystem, both social, economic and environmental, and heritage with our First Australians. Have got a big part to play there. And we've also got a lot of links and affiliations with similar companies across Australian industry. We don't believe there's any competitors in this business. We've got so much work to do and so much recovery to do. We're all in it together, as they say. And just quickly, which is beyond the brief of tonight, but we are into the arid rangelands. There's lots of carbon opportunities out there with savanna burning and for spinifex burning. Obviously, working with and engaging with traditional owners and communities, and there's lots of new methodologies coming online all the time, which we've got quite a heavy science background, and we are working with all the partners in that. Thank you very much, and I welcome questions.
Thank you, Kent. That was very comprehensive, very interesting. Indeed, there are some questions that have popped up in the chat box. So there we go with the first question, again from Kiran Dominic. What should be the scale number of trees to get paid as carbon credits? So I imagine that there is a minimum scale of project so as to enter into the possibility to generate carbon credits. What is that in the context of Australia?
Yeah, it's a very common question we get asked. Thanks, Karen. And generally it's per hectare. That's the way it's measured. As long as there's a minimum number of trees, and in our case, it's generally about 200 trees per hectare. Of local eucalypts, casuarinas, you know, full mix of species. So we get paid per hectare over the 25 years. It's not per tree. So that's the way it works. In terms of a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, it could be somewhere between 7 and 15 trees for that ton of carbon to be sequestered over the 25 years. But as you can imagine, a eucalypt is really, really big, and it might even be a ton just in that one tree, or the other shrubs and smaller type trees may only have a couple 100 kilos, but it's per hectare that we get paid, yeah. And economies of scale, you'd want to have a 100 hectare project really to make it worthwhile.
100, is that what you said is the lower limit to enter in a carbon compensation system? 100.
You can do it as low as, yeah, you can do it as low as 10 hectares, but really for economies of scale, with all the fees and the registration and the bureaucracy that you've got to go through, even with 100 hectares, it's marginal. So the bigger the better, really. But as a carbon aggregator, we can actually put lots of projects together, which also helps with costs.
Okay. Interesting. Mr. Kerkman says, South Africa, like Australia, is fire prone. Do you incorporate fire resilience into your projects? And so what does this entail?
Yes, indeed. There's quite a bit to this question, and it's generally the first question that's asked of us. What do we do about fire? And a big reason why we use our native species is that they've evolved with fire over millennia, and as I mentioned, the first Australians as part of that. So they will regenerate. Having said that, that's with cool burning and not very hot fires. But with climate change, we are seeing, as you would have seen in Australia on the East Coast last summer, where the fires are getting so much hotter, and like firefighters just have never seen conditions like it previously. So we're in a new paradigm there. So really, we're not sure how that's going to play out, say in 10 or 20 years' time. But what we do is have a very comprehensive fire management plan. Our carbon estimation areas, or our blocks, our compartments, if you like, are only 100 hectares maximum. And we have fire breaks and we have mobile fire units. We have, because as you're probably aware, the quicker you can get to the fire after ignition, the better chance you have of putting it out. And at the moment, we are quite over the 18 million hectares. We're spread out. Some of our projects are 1,000 kilometres apart. So we have that benefit as well of spreading them out across the landscape.
Okay, thank you very much, Kent. Next question, what do you think about socio-economic impacts of these reforestation projects on the local people?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and it's one that we focus on a lot. Being a farmer myself, I know exactly how, rural local people think, and everyone's got their own way of doing things. We've seen a massive drift, a population drift from rural areas to the cities and to the coast in Australia, really across Australia, but very much so in Western Australia, where our rural populations, our rural towns are dying. We're getting less and less people living there. And that's why we talk about co-benefits of our projects. We don't want to just grow trees and lock it up and move away. We want it to be complementary to existing farming systems. And as I mentioned, regenerative farmers in particular are thinking about 20 to 30% of their farm landscape going back to trees. And that'll make them more resilient, more profitable, and encourage them to stay there on their land and to basically manage it and be our de facto managers, if you like. In terms of, as I said, that there is data out there about the multiple factor of both economic and social benefits of these projects. And there's one ongoing at the moment. So as soon as that's published, I'll be able to share that.
Okay, thank you. A question of Ben Strombach. Do you think carbon offsets and carbon trading be around in 10 or 20 years? Do you think that carbon offsets and carbon trading will still exist? There seems to be a strong pushback and much talk about carbon taxes, etc., rather than carbon offset and carbon trading.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. That's a great question as well. And yes, I do. I think the supply and demand, especially here in Australia, is so much out of whack. I mean, if the federal government did want to get serious about climate change, we just don't have enough carbon offsets to mitigate those reductions in what we're putting into the atmosphere. So that's number one. As far as a carbon tax goes, we did have a carbon tax. It was called a carbon tax in 2013. Not only did our national emissions start heading down, there was a strong incentive for a lot more carbon offsets to be around to help that reduction, to help that trend down as much as possible. So I see them as complementary, not as mutually exclusive.
Okay, that's clear. Again, Kiran, will you or your company be able to do this outside Australia? Will it apply only for forestry trees, or also, say, other kind of landscapes like orchard trees?
Yes, we definitely will be going international. One of the co-founders, Harley Lacey, he's a landscape ecologist, and he's been doing a lot around the work around the world. So we'll definitely be looking at that. And there are, in Australia anyway, there is a forestry methodology. So it is there already. So definitely for hardwoods and pine and blue gums and whatnot, there is a methodology there. I'm not quite so sure about the fruit trees and orchard trees. there certainly isn't one at the moment in Australia, a methodology, but I'll leave it to the forum to, if there's something else around the world that we can use. I don't even know if Gold Standard have got one, but it makes sense because those trees are there for, 20, 30, 50 years.
Okay. Thank you. You're saying you're going national. Are you going beyond national and outside Australia as well, or for the moment your focus is to stay within Australia?
Well, there's so much work to do here, there's no doubt. But if we can help others in other countries get going, we're more than welcome to do that. There's no doubt about that. We've all got our own skill sets. We've actually, over the last 12 years, we've really honed in our direct seeding techniques. So we can do a seedling, it's like a tube stock for $1 planted in the soil, and we can do a direct seeded seedling, if you like, for 10 cents per stem. So, and we should be able to bring that down lower and lower. But so, yeah, in answer to your question, absolutely.
Okay. Do you think impacts on rural economy will create permanent job positions rather than those related to the first stages of reforestation?
Yeah, this is a question that's asked by, I guess, farmers that are out there now doing their agriculture. And it's probably happening around the world, but in particular on our broad acre annual monoculture cropping industry here in West Australia, that's contributed to less people in our country towns and our rural areas because the machinery is getting bigger, so less people are needed per unit or per farming enterprise. And we'd like to think because we're planting a multi-species, there'll be all sorts of biodiversity benefits with that. So there'll be people out there to be measuring that. There'll be fire managers. Grazing is not excluded from our projects because it's a good fire mitigation tool as well, just to keep down those grasses every year. So there'll be grazing managers or neighbours utilising our areas for their animals. So no, we like to think that we are going to stop that population drift to the cities and the coast and to have long-term permanent jobs out there.
Okay.
We like to think about the theory of abundance and not the theory of reducing everything down to just one crop, a monoculture. We'd like to think that the more biodiversity, but the more resources, natural resources that we can put back out there, the more biomass we can put out there in vegetation above the soil and below the soil, we think is only going to help everybody be better off.
Yeah, the next question is actually about that. Wood production, would that be an opportunity that comes up with these more biodiverse interventions?
Yeah, most definitely. No, it's so that we've already got a methodology for wood production, and it depends on the harvesting cycle, but it's either 25 or 35 years over a 100-year period, and yeah, so that's working really well, both in hardwood, pine, wood chips, and others. So very much so.
Okay. The next question that pops up: the maintenance of these vast plantation areas, especially in terms of water supply for irrigation. Do you have any concern about that? In the previous presentation, we learned about forests that require irrigation. Is that an issue in the regions that you are working in?
No, not at all. As I mentioned, all our forests are rain-fed, so we don't irrigate at all. But there is concern that it's going to lower the water table in our areas. But we are finding the opposite is happening because it's attracting more rainfall. I think Aida referred to this, and that yeah, it's a bit of a delicate balance. I think if you oversupply or if you put too many trees per hectare in certain areas, there certainly will be a lowering of the water table. But there's got to be a happy medium there whereby we get back to that optimum level that was there before it was all cleared in the first place. So it's a different scenario here. It's a winter rainfall pattern, a Mediterranean climate. So as long as we can get that forest established in winter, it'll keep going. It'll get there. and with our rip and scalping, so we actually create a water harvesting bed, if you like, for the plants.
Okay.
We don't just plant on flat ground. We actually rip and scalp. So we've got a V-shaped scalp where any rain that falls in that V ends up in the middle row where the tree is, and it gives more water where it's needed.
Splendid. The tree survival, we learned from Antonio del Campo that the trends in tree survival in planting here in the Mediterranean area. Do you have any idea about tree mortality in the examples that you have presented?
Yeah, so in the establishment phase, we probably have about a 70 to 80% survival. So we lose between 20 and 30% initially. So we allow for that in our the number that we either plant or seed. And then, yes, we definitely have seen trees drop out of the system after 10 years. And all that is just finding its own level as a hectare of land. Obviously, there's what we call a site capacity. So every hectare, pardon me, has got a nutrient and water capacity for that hectare. And we've done measurements out in remnant vegetation that has never been grazed or touched much. So we've got a pretty good idea how much biomass can be supported in each area, pretty much.
Okay. Next question of Ashley Brown. How can we find out more about the restoration techniques that are used in your environment?
Yeah, I'm not sure really. I suppose I guess we just supply our contact details through you, Bim, and depending where in the world we are, yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. Okay.
Great. I have a few questions myself, Kent. What changes in regulation and politics would be desirable for promoting more initiatives and projects like the ones that you are engaged in?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, here in Australia, it's gone the opposite way to pretty much the rest of the world, except for probably America. So definitely, if the federal government gets serious about the climate emergency we've got. And they've got a thing called a safeguard mechanism at the moment. So basically, they've said any entity that's emitting above 100,000 tonne per year, that's what they call the baseline. And so in every corresponding year, if they emit over that, they've got to offset that. But really, it's got to be ratcheted down. So instead of just staying at 100,000 for the next 10 years, it's got to be 90,000 next year, 80,000. And so it decreases. So that puts pressure on either the entities to reduce their emissions as much as they can, or look to us to plant more trees and to do those offsets. So we encourage when businesses approach us for solutions, we encourage them to first of all measure so they know what they're emitting, to do as much as they can to reduce those emissions, and then any unavoidable emissions we're more than happy to offset with our projects.
Okay, and what is the potential in Australia to regreen degraded land in terms of surface, for example, and how much carbon could be captured in all this degraded land if it were regreened?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very, very rough. In WA, of the 80 million hectares of rangelands, if we could regenerate 20 or store 20 tonnes per hectare out there, that's 1.6 billion tonne. So that's just in the rangelands of WA alone. And in the wheat belt, we've got approximately 18 million hectares. I mean, we wouldn't revegetate the whole lot, obviously, but just for the sake of the exercise, 150 tonne per hectare there would generate nearly 3 billion tonne of carbon. So certainly because of the size of the continent of Australia, I mean, WA is the biggest state. So it doesn't really answer your question, Bim, but certainly, on a world scale, we're probably one of the countries that can do more than our fair share. That's for sure.
I imagine. Okay, Kent, we have come at the end of this question and answer session. Thank you very much for your contribution and your evening time, and keep up the good work. And we'll be in touch with more questions that come over the email. Okay.
Fantastic, Ben. Really appreciate the opportunity, and good night, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. So we have come at the end of this symposium. I think we have learned a lot in these 3 hours from the 5 speakers and from the public. Aida Bargues pointed out the different functions of forest landscapes and how each of these functions are important, and thus how forest landscape restoration is helping to enhance these functions. Not only forest planting, but also natural regeneration is a way of increasing tree cover. And agroforestry, where trees and farming land exist together, is especially important in many areas. Aida explained on the African Forest Landscapes initiatives, the Great Green Wall and the Regreening Africa. And we had Professor JiaoJun Zhu, who told us about the huge Tree North afforestation project, how it was evaluated, how it affected in soil erosion, desertification, and carbon sequestration. Professor Zhu gave us a view on the future of TNAP with enhanced forest management and more emphasis on ecology. Our third speaker, Professor Del Campo, gave us insights in plant mortality and forestation projects in the Mediterranean area, the ecological and anthropogenic factors that affect seedling establishment. He explained the way that survival is monitored and the measures that help to increase survival rate. Then we had Dr. Dawoud, who talked about forestation in the very adverse conditions of the Arab Peninsula, how forests are managed and the importance of these forests for the inhabitants of Abu Dhabi. We learned how the authorities in Abu Dhabi are changing the water management in the country to ensure a sustainable water supply and forest management in this region, how $150 million per year is spent on maintaining these forests that are considered a cultural heritage in the Emirates. And finally, Ken Broad, our last speaker, focused on the problem of overcleared landscape in Western Australia and how climate change is affecting this region with lower rainfall, aggravating the problem of land degradation, and how planting native and biodiverse species in a context of regenerative farming is helping to generate carbon credits and recover land at a cost of merely 30 Australian dollars per year per hectare. I thank you all for participating in this event, and we will make sure that all those who have participated receive the link to the compilation that we are going to make about of these 3 hours broadcasting, and the PDF files with the presentations and resumes. Thank you very much, and hoping to see you at the next event of Desert Leaves.